Hello everyone and welcome to my beginner's guide to Kerbal Space Program. I'm here in the administrative building because I want to show you this contract I picked up to ferry 2 tourists safely to their destinations. And if we go down here and take a look, one of these destinations is to orbit the moon. Now this is something we have done before, so I'm not going to be talking about how to orbit the moon. If you need that information, I suggest that you check out this video right here. But what I am going to do is use this as an opportunity to build another vessel and to talk about some more tips when it comes to building your rocket. Specifically, we're going to take a look at a tool we haven't looked at yet, the Re-Root Tool, and how that can help us do some specific things. And we're also going to take a look at subassemblies and how you can use subassemblies to quicken up your builds. And along the way, we're also going to introduce the launch escape system and how we can set up an abort sequence to help make sure that our Kerbals remain safe. Well, let's get to it. So what we have here is the Kerbal 2. Yeah, I've gotten away from lumbering my rockets. That was getting a little bit silly, so I'm going to start naming them under their function. And this is a little rocket capable of carrying 3 Kerbals, and it holds 1,860 meters per second at delta V, more than enough for us to get ourselves out to the moon, achieve an orbit, and to come back to Kerbin. But there's something about this that I want to adapt. I want to give my Kerbals an escape system. Something that if things go really badly during launch, that I can just hit the abort key and my Kerbals will end up evacuating quickly from the rocket and come back safely down to the surface. Now, all things considered, really, this isn't 100% necessary. I mean, we can just simply, revert our flight back to launch. However, some of you more hardcore players may have that feature turned off, and as well, I think it does add a fun element of realism to our rocket. So let's take a look at the launch escape system. So if I go over here to the utility tab, we have here, well, the launch escape system, and it is a launch tower that has built-in rockets that are meant to pull the crewed part of your vessel away. But you can see here, I got no good way to attach it. So what I want to do is do a little bit of modification to this vehicle. We're going to remove the parachute just temporarily. No panic, we do need the parachute to get down to the surface. And then we're going to replace that with a fairing, a 1.25 meter fairing. And I'm just going to right click on it so that it won't be building the fairing. I don't want to be building the fairing just yet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to be putting that parachute back on there again. Now we're going to get into the fairing. We're going to look at some more of its features. There's so many things you can do with fairings. And what I want to turn on here is this one here, the interstage nodes. We're going to click on that, and that is now going to be on. And if I now bring a piece across here, notice while I got it selected, we have all these little nodes here that we can put this piece on. So, for instance, I could stick it right here, and notice that we got ourselves a little bit of a platform. Now, one thing I do want to draw attention to, we're going to zoom in here really closely. If you take a look at these little nodes here, notice there's 2 of them. There's one that is above this little platform that all of a sudden appears. And there's another one, if we come down a little bit, I'm not sure if I can hit it or not. I'm having trouble hitting it, but it is below. And you got to make sure that you are on the node that you want to be on. So that's one thing to be a little bit careful about. So for instance, I could put this right here. Now, the problem with this system right now, though, is that, okay, now I do have my launch escape system on here with my parachute on here, but once we've achieved our orbit, this launch escape system is no longer necessary. I would like to jettison it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab myself a decoupler, the TD-12 decoupler. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it upside down. That's an important piece of this. I'm going to put that right back here. See the little arrow? The arrow is telling you which part it's going to detach from and which part it's going to stay to. So this is the base of this little triangle. That's the part that's sticky, so to speak. So if I put my launch tower back on here, my escape tower back on here, this decoupler will stay attached to the escape tower when I jettison it. That's what I want to happen. So this will disappear, and that will be just great. What also is super nice is this whole truss structure will also disappear. Though you can decide whether you like this truss structure or not. If I click back onto the fairing, and you can see here there's a button here for the truss structure. Its default is for it to be on. I can simply turn that off if I want to lose the truss structure. I think I'm actually going to keep it off. You can see what it's done now. It's created a nice space for my parachute plus something up here. Now, this gap is kind of silly, so we're going to use the fairing to fix up this gap. We're going to now build the fairing, and we're just going to go straight up here, and we're just going to close the fairing around that decoupler like that. So now what we have is a bit of a fairing. If we back off a little bit, that doesn't really look too bad. Okay, now let's set up our staging and our abort sequence. First the staging, because that's what's going to happen most often. Once we are almost achieving our orbit, we don't need this thing anymore, so I'd like to be able to stage it. So when I stage it, what do I need to do? Well, I need to turn on these rockets. That is this little SRB right here. That stage there turns on rockets that are hidden under here. This thing has some solid rocket fuel in there to help along. I also want to stage this decoupler, so we're going to drag that into that stage group, and I would also like to stage the fairing, so that all of that will happen at the same time. So that's if everything goes well. What if things go wrong and we need to get our Kerbals out of there? For that, we need to set up our Abort Action Group. So we're going to go over here to Actions. There is an action group here called Abort. And what we got to think about is, okay, if I call an abort, what are all the things that I need to have happen? Well, number one, I need for this launch tower to fire. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on that, and we have all the things we could potentially do with this launch tower. I would like to activate that engine. That's what I would like to do. So that'll activate the engine and start pulling it up while it's still detached. So I want to keep that detached, but I do want to detach the command module from the whole rest of the rocket, and that is this decoupler right here. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to hit decouple. So now if I hit an abort, it will decouple here, it will fire off these rockets, and the whole idea of that is for it to safely pull our Kerbals away from the rest of the rocket. Okay, let's save that and put it to the test. So to call an abort, there's a couple of things you can do. Number one, if you come up here towards where your altimeter is, there's a little section there it is, and it pops out, and it's the abort. If I click on that, we will get an abort, but that's kind of a fumble. If you're in the middle of an emergency and panicking, having the wherewithal to get your mouse up there and click on that button might not be something you'd be interested in. So there is a shortcut key for it, which is the backspace key on your keyboard. So if you hit backspace, that will be an automatic abort. That's actually a big key on most keyboards, so that's not a bad one for it to be. But I'm going to do it using this button up here just so you can see it. You can't see me hitting the backspace key. So we're going to hit that abort, and you can see what happens there. And then once this rocket is done, we want to stage and then stage again to deploy our parachute. And the parachute deploys, and we have separated from the rocket, and we're coming safely down to the surface. Okay, so we've now set ourselves up an abort. Now it's time to build ourselves a booster for this rocket. Remember how this works. We need about a delta V of about a little over 3,600 meters per second is what I like to budget. Now, building boosters is something we have talked about a lot in the past, so I'm going to assume you do have those things down. If you want to, check out this video here for a quick refresher, but let's just jump straight to the chase. So here we have our core stage thus far. There's got one new part in it, which is this one here, the TVR-1180C stack tri-coupler. Great part. You can see what it does is it allows you to attach 3 stacks of tanks on here with some, in this case I put some Reliant engines down here on the bottom, clearly giving me much more thrust. I also shored things up a bit with some struts. I like to use some struts down here at the bottom to kind of strap the bottom end of these together so that they get a little wobbly if you don't do that. And I also have some struts up here connecting this wider part to the narrower part, because these narrow parts can sometimes be a little bit flimsy in the middle of your rocket. I then slapped on 3 liquid fuel boosters here down the side with some swivel engines down here on the bottom, and I have all 6 of these engines all firing off at launch, which gives me a whole whack of thrust, more than enough to lift this thing off the ground. I also use some fuel lines here to create some asparagus staging. Again, this is a technique to get the most out of your engines. If you are unfamiliar with asparagus staging, check out the video that I have right here. But this gives me, if I put it back on vacuum, 3,647 meters per second. This should get the job done, but there's a little trick I want to show you. And that has to do with trying to get these guys to peel away a little bit more nicely. You see, they're really tight to the rocket. Moreover, if you actually look, I got these radial decouplers kind of not going outwards, but kind of sideways. I'm rather concerned that if I actually stage this, that these rockets might actually crash back into the main rocket. I want to try and see if I can make them come off a little bit more cleanly. Now, there are a couple of different ways to achieve this, probably more than a couple for the creative ones out there. But this is one that actually I just recently learned, and somebody pointed it out in the comments, and I thought this is a brilliant idea, so I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to do what first seems a little bit counterintuitive. I'm going to take the force percentage and turn that right off, so these things won't be pushing on these boosters at all when they separate. Instead, what we're going to use is aerodynamics to get the job done. So we're going to go to the aerodynamics tab. I'm going to pick up the basic fin, and I'm still on 3-way symmetry here. I'm going to put a basic fin right here towards the top of my rocket, and I want this to be parallel or perpendicular, I suppose, to the direction of the rocket. I want this booster to be peeling off in this direction down on your screen. So I'm going to put this on here perpendicularly, and of course, because I have 3-way symmetry, there's one on each of those. And I'm also going to now hold the Alt key, copy that. I'm going to put one on the other side. Now, you might be getting a little bit, well, wait, is this really going to work? I mean, this is just like a wing now. This is just going to make it, I don't see how this is going to push it outwards. We're going to take the rotate tool. We're going to select this. We're going to go down here and go to take the snap off. So we're on fine control, and we're just going to very lightly rotate this that way. Okay, so what's going to happen now? If you imagine, this rocket, of course, is going to be going upwards. So the airstream is coming down this booster this way. The air is hitting this side of this fin, and it's pushing that air towards the rocket, which is going to create a counterforce pushing the booster away from the rocket once we let go. What I want to do, of course, is do the exact same thing here on the other side. You got to be a little bit careful because this is bringing the center of lift of your rocket up, and we've talked about this in the past. You want your center of lift to be well down. So if you find that this is starting to get your rocket to spin out of control, what you can do to counter that is take something like some nice large fins and stick them down here at the bottom to bring your center of lift back down again. But I actually found with this rocket upon testing that it worked very, very well just like this. It was very stable, probably thanks to these overly strong reaction wheels that KSP gives us. I'm going to finally just clean this up just a little bit because I find these look a little dorky sticking out as much as they are. So I'm going to take the move tool, I'm going to click on these, and notice that the arrows are, I want to move them inwards, and these arrows aren't going the right way. I'm going to put it on local so that the red one's right in line with that fin, and we're just going to, still on fine control, good, we're just going to tuck this in just so I can just barely see that orange line that's on the fin. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. Let's see this in action. And there they go, and look at the way they peel away. Isn't that gorgeous? Okay, that test worked very well. So let's get back into the vehicle assembly building. Well, I think I got myself here a rocket that I am pretty pleased with, and if you would like to play with this yourself, I will put a link to the craft file in the description. But I do have one more thing I want to show you, and that is if we go up here at the very, very top left, you see this big arrow here, and it says Enable Advanced Mode. So we're going to put on Advanced Mode, and oh my god, we got all these other icons. Actually, these first pile of icons are just different ways for you to sort the parts that you've collected. So for instance, the first one here allows the parts to be sorted by size. I don't have a lot of different size, so these are all my 0.625 meter parts, or size 0, size 1 are 1.25 meter parts. Well, I guess I have more of them than I thought, and etc. like that. You can filter by resources, filter by module, filter by manufacturer. I mean, if you really are a Dinkelstein Kerman's Construction Emporium fan, I suppose you could do that. But down here's the one I really want to take a look at, subassemblies. And I already have a few subassemblies that I've already created. Let me show you what they are about. I'm going to save this one because we're going to go new. I want to show you this subassembly. So let's say I'm building something. I don't know, I'm not going to do anything too exciting. There we go, that's what I built. And I would like to get this thing into orbit. And I take a look here and I see that, oh, this thing weighs 2.25 tons down here under the engineer report. Go back to these subassemblies here. What I've done is I've organized my boosters by what payload they can lift into low Kerbin orbit. So for instance, my booster here, my Swivel 1-RT2H2 booster. If you're going to make boosters, you got to give them technical sounding names, I think. If I click on that, I have me a booster that I can just slap under there, and I can be pretty confident that this will get into low Kerbin orbit. It has the delta V that is required. That clearly saves me a whole lot of time. So how did I do that? Well, first of all, this booster might look a little bit familiar. It's actually one of my rockets from a previous video. I just took the booster and shoved it into the subassembly. As soon as I have a booster that I'm pretty happy with, that's what I like to do so I can keep reusing it. So I'll show you exactly how I do that by doing the exact same thing. Let's not save this. With my Kerpolo 2. There it is. So with this guy right here. So how do we get this booster so that I can save it? Well, we're going to use a feature. Actually, we're going to use a couple of features. One is this subassembly features, and the other one we're going to use is this fourth tool on our toolbar here that we've yet to talk about, called the Re-Root Tool. You see, every vessel has a root part, and by default, it's the very first part you use in your build. For this vessel, the root part is the command capsule. Every other part is ultimately attached to that, or attached to parts that are attached to that. And you can tell because if I put the mouse over the command cap, the entire vessel highlights. It doesn't do that for any of the rest of the parts. I can change what that root part is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the Re-Root tool, and I'm going to want my root part to be the decoupler that separates my payload from the rest of the booster right here. I'm just going to click on it. So now, let go. Now this is the root part. See, when I highlight the decoupler, now the whole rocket highlights. If I highlight the command capsule, it's only highlighting the stuff that's now collected to the command capsule. And you're like, well, why'd you do that? Because now I can take this payload and I can chuck it away, and all I'm left with is the booster. Now, I want to save this booster. It's really easy to do. I just got to take the booster and drop it into my sub-assembly zone. But I first want to figure out what kind of mass can this thing lift into low Kerbin orbit. I do that by just going over here, grabbing myself something that's pretty heavy, like a big fuel can. Here's a big fuel can. We're just going to stick that up there. I have no intention of flying this thing. This is just a big dummy mass that's on here. We're going to go over to Delta V, going to make sure this is on vacuum, and we're going to remind ourselves that we need about a little over 3,600 meters per second in order to get into low Kerbin orbit. Right now this says 2,960, so this is too much mass for this thing to lift. But if I right click on it, well, it's full of fuel and stuff, so I can decrease the mass by simply removing fuel or removing oxidizer, and you don't have to be you can remove whatever it is you want. You don't have to, you're not trying to fly this thing, so it doesn't have to be pretty. And you can see now my delta V is now up to 3,569. That's closer. So let's take a little bit more oxidizer. 3,670. That's probably now getting into the right ballpark. That's too much. I think if I probably go a little bit, that's too much. Yeah, that's probably too much. We'll go with that. And if you want to, you can really fine-tune this by putting in raw numbers. But to be honest, I just want to get approximately how much masking this left. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the Re-Root tool once again. And this time I'm going to make that big fuel tank my root tool. Why did I do that? Because now I can go down here and select the decoupler and remove it, so that the only thing here now is that big fuel can. And I can go down here to the engineer's report, click on that, and notice that the mass of this thing is about 10.3 tons. I always like to round down. So this tells me that this booster probably can lift about 10.3 tons into low Kerbin orbit. Alright, now let's save the booster. So we're going to grab the subassemblies once again. We're going to take this booster that I've just removed. We're going to put it into our drop zone. And we get this little menu. They want us to give this thing a name. So I'm going to call this, and I like to call my boosters based on the engine they use. So this has a core stage of 3 Reliant. So I'm going to call this the Reliant 3. And then after the dash, I put in what other stages are there. So we got a radial stage. I like to use an R. You come up with any other system you want. I just like making it. If you just want to call it Fred, it doesn't really matter, right? And these are swivel engines on the bottom, and we got 3 of them. So this is going to be an RS for swivel 3 booster. So that's how I come up with my names. You come up with whatever you want. So this is the Reliant 3 RS3 booster, but the more important thing is for me to record here payload to LKO, and it's still down here on the engineer's report, 10.3 tons. And we're going to save that, and now that gets added to the other subassemblies that I have. So now in the future, if I end up with a payload and I can see that it's 10.3 tons or maybe a little bit less than that, I know I can simply just take this booster, slap it on the bottom, and I probably got myself something that's going to work, saving me a whole whack of time. And while we watch Jebediah escort our 2 tourists around the moon, why don't we go over what we looked at in this video. We started off by taking a look at a new part, the launch escape system. We attached it to our rockets, and we talked about how to set up an abort sequence so that if things go astray, well, you have the ability to get your Kerbals out of harm's way. We also took a look at how to use these small winglets on your radial boosters to use aerodynamics to get those boosters to peel away in a nice controlled fashion. And then we finished off by taking a look at subassemblies and the Re-Root tool. There are a whole ton of uses for these 2 tools, but what we used them for here was to save our boosters into the subassembly menu so that we can reuse them in future rockets, thus saving us a ton of time in the vehicle assembly building. Time that is obviously much better spent flying. And with that, I'm going to draw this episode to a close. I hope you found it useful, and I hope to see you again for the next one.